Now, in our last lesson, we talked about the second resurrection. We've been talking about the first resurrection for several lessons, but now the second one, and it's outlined in 1 Corinthians 15, and it's also outlined in John 5, verses 28 to 29. That's the second resurrection. In the second resurrection, it has to be the body, because we've been reading that what body are they going to come with? And how are they going to be raised? He said, you just gave the answer when you said the word raised. That refers to resurrection. Something is not quickened, and it's not going to be raised or resurrected except it first die. So the only part of you now that needs to die so that it can be resurrected and made alive and immortal is your body. Because he said your soul and your spirit were already non-physically resurrected because you were dead non-physically in your soul and spirit when you were in a state of trespasses and sins as a sinner and an unbeliever. That's already been dealt with. You don't have to die again so that you can have a resurrection according to what this is saying. You just die non-physically once, and you've been in a state of death. And so it's quickened, it's made alive. Now, because it's talking about the word sowing in verse 36, that which thou sowest is not quickened except to die. You think of a seed and you think of agriculture. Now, Jesus spoke of his resurrection and used the same concept of a seed that's being sown, which is why Paul the Apostle is likewise using it. Paul didn't bring out any doctrines that Jesus didn't already teach. Paul is basing everything he's saying on what Jesus said, contrary to what seminaries and theological studies will give people when they will say Jesus never would have condoned Paul the Apostle's teachings. That is tripe and it's nonsense. But just like Paul using the word sowing and it coming forth, except after it die, Jesus used that in John chapter 12. And we see him bringing this up in verse 24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. So there's a resurrection, and bringing forth fruit requires life. How could there be bringing forth fruit after something has died unless it resurrects after it dies? And the Greek people wanted to see Jesus. It says this in verse 20. They wanted to understand and talk with Jesus, so they went to Philip, and then Philip came and told Andrew, and they all came to Jesus and explained this to them. These people want to see you. So this is what he wanted them to hear when they saw him for the first time. The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it. He that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If you're going to serve me, you've got to follow me, so that where I am, there may my servant also be. There may also my servant be. And this is what he wanted them to know. So he can only be talking about his resurrection. He's talking about being glorified. Now, being glorified is being more than what he was. And the state in which he was at that current point in time was a corn of wheat that is alone. So if this lonely corn of wheat would fall into the ground and die, it won't be alone. Except it fall in, it's going to be alone. But it's going to fall into the ground and die. And that is when Jesus would be glorified. He would die. If he dies, he would then bring forth much fruit. And bringing forth fruit requires life. So after dying and bringing forth fruit, the only answer you can explain to this apparent contradiction is that he's going to live again after he dies. And when he does live again, when he is glorified, he's going to bring forth much fruit. And now when Jesus Christ resurrected like a seed sown and came up again, was it not his physical body that came up? Yes, it was. So there have been people that actually take what 1 Corinthians 15 and said about sowing, and they claim that the body is like the shell of a seed. And the shell breaks away, decays, and rots away, just like they try to teach you that when you physically die, your body is going to decay and fade away and go to nothing and never be resurrected again. That is actually the opposite of what Paul was trying to say throughout 1 Corinthians 15. He wasn't saying your body is like a shell that's going to rot away. Just like Jesus using the example of a seed going into the ground and coming up again, Jesus' body actually came up when he referred to this whole picture of him being like a corn of wheat falling into the ground and dying, or a kernel of wheat, or a seed. It does come forth. And so when Paul was talking about the it that dies and allows a second experience of resurrection, with what body do they come? How are they coming up when they're raised or in the resurrection? You fool, you just said it when you said raised. Something isn't raised or it's not quickened and made alive except it first die. And the only thing about Jesus that would die and come to life again was his body, because he certainly didn't have to die to sin. He certainly didn't have a soul and a spirit or a non-physical body that was sinning and had to be raised from a distinct sinful existence of trespasses and sins. You see, Ephesians 2:1 says that we were dead in trespasses and sins, and God quickened us who were dead in those states with a non-physical resurrection. Now, when Paul's talking about a sower sowing seed and that which is sowed, he's talking about seed language. And Jesus was using seed language to talk about his physical resurrection, not his soul and spirit, non-physical resurrection. But then there appears to be a conundrum there, as though verse 37 contradicts it. Because in verse 36, the same thing that dies is the it that is quickened and made alive a second time. But verse 37 says, that which thou sowest not that body that shall be, but you sow bare grain. So the body that is going to be is not what's sown and resurrected. You're not sowing the body that will be. You're sowing a body that's going to be like bare grain and then chance of wheat when it comes forth, or come of some other grain. And God gives it a body as it had pleased him, and to every seed his own body. All flesh is not the same flesh. There's one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts. So he's saying as much as there's a certain kind of flesh of men, we're going to get a different kind of flesh when it comes forth in resurrection. As different as the flesh of beasts is different from the flesh of men, there's flesh of fishes and birds. They're all different bodies. There are celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There's one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon. There's one glory of the stars and another from all of those others. And they all differ in glory as far as their bodies are concerned. And he said, this is the way it is in the resurrection. It's sown in corruption, but it's raised in incorruption. So he says the body that goes down is corruption, is a corruptible body. But the body that raised isn't the same kind of corruptible. It's now incorruptible. So here's actually the explanation that there's no contradiction. When I say to people that the body that goes down into the tomb or into the grave when our second resurrection occurs, it's going to be the same body that was buried that's going to be raised, because it's the only thing that's left to die and be given life a second time. My soul and my spirit were already given the second life. That's the first resurrection. But my body is the only thing left of me, like Paul, the only thing left of Paul, to await a resurrection. But then they say, Mike, you just said the body that goes down is the same body that goes up. Paul said it's not the same body that goes down, the same body that comes up. He said there's a different body. What you sow is not the body that's going to be. So, Mike, if you're saying the body that you sow is the body that's going to resurrect, Paul said, that which thou sowest, you're not sowing the body that shall be. But if you read the whole thing together like I just did, it's a different body, not in that it was exchanged by a different body other than itself. This body, toss it out, exchange it for another body. No, it's the same body, but instead of being exchanged, it's changed. So when you read verses 37 onward, especially verse 37 and especially verse 38, where it says the body that's going down is not the body that's coming up, it's talking about a change of the nature of the body. The nature of the body is going to change. It's the same body, but its mortal state is going to be changed to an immortal state. It's not going to be one body exchanged for another. It's going to be the same body that is changed, not exchanged, just changed. Exchange, ex comes from the Greek prefix ek, or out of, or exit. The body is gone and it exits, and there's another body. So it's exchange, but it's not exchanged in this case. It's changed. So verse 37 is talking about the different bodies as their natures are concerned. It's right now mortal, but it's going to be immortal. The same body's going to go down and come up, but although it's the same body object-wise, it's a different body nature-wise. It's been changed. And from this point on, Paul stresses change. And that's why when you actually read down further, he said, the same body, the it that is sown in corruption, is the it that is raised, but instead of being corruptible, now it's incorruptible. It's the same it, it's the same body, but it's a different nature because it's corruption that is put on incorruption. And now we're going to focus on what it means to be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye.